are in our series on We Believe. I wanted to look and see if I wanted to do another reflection on Christmas tonight, and I felt like in light of our times, I wanted to address this because this is very, in our culture today, and what our country is presently experiencing, this lesson tonight comes well into play with what's going on. I want to speak to you tonight about what we believe concerning civil government. Is our live stream working, Terry?
Yes.
Okay, great. We got that back up and running, got that all going. If you're watching us live stream, we appreciate it. I would appreciate it if you're watching, if you would make a comment or a like on the page. That way we know you're there. We can see how many people are watching, but we can't see who is watching. So if you'd make a comment and identify yourself on there, that way we can send you a bill. No, we won't send you a bill, but we will pray for you. If we see your name on there, we're going to pray for you. And so stand with me if you would. Romans chapter 13. If you don't have a Bible with you, there are Bibles in the pew there you can use. 39 this morning. We have been steady between 35 and 40 for the last 3 months. Also, while I'm thinking about it, Brother Brian, I need to touch base with you at the end of the service. Remind me that I need to talk to you because I'm like a duck. I wake up in a new world every day. I might be completely off on some other tangent, but if you can remember to tell me that, I'd appreciate it. Romans chapter 13, verse number 1. We are speaking about civil government tonight. And this is not a political message. It is a doctrinal message. And I want to help you with that tonight because many questions have been raised by Christians, and even Christians today are divided on this issue. And so we want to cover some things tonight. And I thought it would fit right in with our theme on Sunday nights of what we believe. Romans chapter 13, verse number 1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resisteth shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? That's speaking of municipal powers. Wilt thou not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. That means those that are in power will praise you if you do what's right and you are a law-abiding citizen. For he is the minister of God. Now I want you to let that sink in for a minute. They are ministers of God. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God. There's that phrase again. A revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore, needs be subject not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also. For they are God's ministers attending continually unto this very thing. Render therefore all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom is due, fear to whom fear is due, honor to whom honor. And I'm going to leave off reading right there. Father, I pray you bless now the reading of your word. Use it for your honor and glory. And I pray these things in thy name. Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. If you go to our website, you're going to see a section called What We Believe on our website. And on that website, you will see what we believe about civil government. And I quote from that page, we believe that civil government is a divine appointment for the interests of good order, and good order of human society, that magistrates are to be prayed for, conscientiously honored and obeyed, look at this, except in things opposed to the will of our Lord Jesus Christ, who is the only Lord and conscience and the coming Prince of the kings of the earth. Now, we just read a passage of Scripture 2 weeks before my wife and I were to be married. This was in May of 1981. We're making a trip down together to see her parents, her family. Now, was that the first time I met them? No, we had met before. I couldn't remember. But we were on our way down there. Now, we lived up in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And the Metroplex, if you want to know how big it is, look at a map of Connecticut. Because the Metroplex is roughly the size of Connecticut, the entire state, and is more populated now. But we were driving from there and driving down the highway down to West Texas, to the West Texas desert town of San Angelo, Texas. And that's out there in the wilderness. I'm telling you, it's out in the desert. It is prairie. It is open prairie land, desert. To me, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful place. A lot of people, not so much. So we're heading down the road. And there's a lot of ranches down there. And there's a lot of cattle down there. And there's a lot of cattle trucks on the road. Now, May in Texas, it's already in the 90s, you understand. And we're driving down the road. And here I am, Bible college student, getting ready to marry my child bride. And we're excited. We're 2 weeks away. And we're heading down to see her parents right before the wedding. And to go to Zentner's Daughter's Steakhouse, where they served at the time, the greatest steak you ever put in your mouth. Amen. And so we're heading down the highway there, and I get behind a cattle truck. You ever smelled a cattle truck? If you're behind a cattle truck, you know you are behind a cattle truck for several reasons. You will see it. You will smell it. They don't smell good. Okay? It don't smell like frankincense and myrrh, folks. It's a nasty smell behind a bunch of dirty old cows. And I did not want to sit behind a cattle truck. This was a 2-lane flat top, black top. And I'm kind of easing around and I'm looking and it's good to go. Now this, you understand, was a 60-mile-an-hour speed limit at that time. And he's barreling down, and at 60 miles an hour, I've got to go a little faster than that to pass him. And I look, and I can see a mile down the road that it's all free and clear. There was one car down there that I was not able to see because it wasn't coming at me, but it was there. And I pulled out, and I put my foot in the middle of that 1979 Toyota Corolla, not known for a very powerful engine, but it can get up to 78 miles an hour in a 60-mile-an-hour zone. And it will get you right past that cattle truck. And I got over, and it's clear, and I look back, and I clear of him, and I make my signal, and I come back on over into the lane, and I back down to about 70-ish, But there was a car I didn't see. It was a blue sedan. And when I went past that blue sedan sitting at the side of the road, he pulled out onto the highway. Driving that car was a man who was an employee of the Texas Department of Public Safety. known as Mr. State Trooper. And little lights come on his car. And he pulls me over. So I pull over, and I get way over. And so he pulls over behind me, and he approaches my vehicle. About that time, the cattle truck went by. And he said, "I have a driver's license, proof of insurance, please." "Yes, sir." Handed it to him. I had a bumper sticker on my back window. Said Arlington Baptist College. I'm a student at Arlington Baptist College. I was sitting there, and he said, "I clocked you doing 78 miles an hour and 60. I said, "Yes, sir." "You see that cattle truck going there?" I said, "I was passing him." And I think he said something to the effect of, "He's ahead of you again." He says, "I'll be right back, sir. I'll give you a driver's license here in a minute." And he came back, handed me a ticket. And he handed me a little certificate saying that the state of Texas did not appreciate me going 78 miles an hour in a 60-mile-an-hour zone. And he looks in the car, and he sees Terry sitting over there, and she's just sitting there kind of quiet and smiling. She was scared to death because she didn't know what I was going to act like. She'd never seen me get a speeding ticket before. And she didn't know what she was going to have to live with for the next 80 miles. Because we were 80 miles away from their house still. And I had my Bible sitting on the dashboard. And he said, "I see you got your Bible up there on the dashboard." I said, "Yes, sir." Sticker says you go to Arlington Baptist College? "Yes, sir. I'm a ministerial student there. I'm a Bible student at the college, studying for the ministry." "Are you a Christian?" "Yes, I am. I am a Christian." And I go to this church. He told me what, and he went to a Baptist church in, was it Wink? Ballinger. He went to there is a Wink, Texas. Yes, there is a town called Wink. But he said, "Yeah, I attend a Baptist church there in Ballinger." I said, "Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, sir." He said, "Well, I'll tell you what I want you to do. Is this your girlfriend?" "Yes, sir. That's my fiance." He said, "Well, I want your fiance to take that Bible there and turn to while you're going down the road. I want her to turn to Romans chapter 13. I want you to read that." "Yes, sir." I don't think she really did. But I said, "Thank you, sir. Have a good day." "Have a good day. Be safe." "Yes, sir." "Don't speed no more." "Yes, sir." And I pull out, and he smiled and waved. I see him smiling, waving in the window there as I pulled out. I didn't lose my cool. She was surprised that I didn't get all angry and lose my cool. She said, "I figured you'd get mad. I figured you'd get angry. I didn't know if you was going to lose your temper after that happened." I said, "I was speeding." She said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, I was speeding. He gave me a ticket because I was speeding. I deserved a ticket. I paid the ticket too. I didn't find it. I was speeding. Caught me speeding. I don't believe in using fuzz busters and things like that. If you're going to speed, but take your chances. Be honest about it. Take your chances." I'm kidding. Don't speed. But what this verse said, and what that state trooper was pointing out to me, was that the Bible says, "Let every soul be subject to the higher powers." Let every soul be subject to the higher powers, because they are ordained of God, and they do not bear the sword in vain. Now, there is a lot of controversy, and has been a lot of controversy this year with COVID and with the government's right to shut down businesses and shut down churches. And so we in our country have a legal recourse by which we can appeal such actions. It's covered in the First Amendment of our Constitution. I'm not talking about freedom of speech or religion. I'm talking about that one that's called redress of grievances. There are 5 tenets in the First Amendment: freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. And I'll read it to you here in a minute. And the fifth one is the right to redress of grievances. I can present my grievances to the government and they have to listen. And we've done that. The state of California, the churches in the state of California just sued the state, sued the governor for shutting them down. Because everybody else was allowed to, you can have football games, you can have, Walmart can have 1,000 people inside of it. Why can't I have 200 in my church? Costco's open. The Los Angeles football team, whatever their name is this week, they're open. You know, everybody can, the NFL's open. The NBA's open for business. Why can't churches be open? So they sued. Same thing happened in New York. The case in New York got to the Supreme Court first. And the Supreme Court said, no, you're not playing fair, New York. You need to let the church, if you're going to let everybody else meet, you have to let the churches meet too. And they slapped the governor on the wrist and told him that. Now, the appellate court in California, they sent their case and everything, and it made its way to the appellate court. The Ninth District Court of Morons said that the churches had to stay closed in California, so to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court sent it back to the appellate court and said, you need to rethink this, and you need to look at our decision on New York. Because you're going to bring this to the Supreme Court and you're going to lose. So why don't you work something out before you bring it to Washington? Because you're going to lose. That's how our system works. But I want you to notice something. We didn't burn buildings in the street. We didn't take government officials hostage or execute them in the street. I know some of us have wanted to, believe me, but we have not resorted to that because we have a constitutional system that protects us. But let me read some things to you here. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13 says, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors, or unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, that's police officers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing ye may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, and not using your liberty for a cloak of maliciousness, but as servants of God. Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Titus chapter 3, verse 1 and 2, the Bible says, put them in mind to be subject to principalities, powers, and to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work, to speak evil of no man, to be no brawlers. Interesting. That word brawler is machismo. It's the same word. It's the same word from we get the Italian word machismo, or our word macho. Brawlers. Don't be brawlers. But gentle, showing all meekness. Meekness is emotional self-control. Temperance is physical self-control. Meekness is emotional self-control. That's what that is. Unto all men. Now, I want to give you 3 things I want you to think about here, because when do we obey God? Here's the question. When are we being obedient to God, and when are we being obedient to man? And when is it a conflict? When is it a conflict? Number one, I want you to consider some context here. I want you to consider the context of where Paul is writing these writings. I read to you what Paul said to the Romans. I read to you what Peter said to the church. I read to you what Paul said to Pastor Titus. And he said, obey them that have the rule over you in the law. He's talking about municipal laws here. He said, because they bear not the sword in vain. They are ministers of God. I pulled into the parking lot this evening, and there was a squad car sitting in the parking lot. They sit here all the time. They sit in our parking lot and do reports and things, and it was one of my officers, Caitlin Stays. Wonderful officer, great, good cop. I've ridden with her a lot, and we're friends. I pulled in and I chatted her up a little bit. What I didn't point out right there was that the one sitting there in the parking lot is a minister of God. Her ultimate authority comes from God himself. Do you know that God gave us the government we have? When Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia was meeting with the Constitutional Congress to determine our government, they had the windows boarded up. They had the windows curtains down, drapes down. They had the doors locked. They wouldn't let anybody in, and the public really didn't know what was going on. And Mr. Franklin came out after a session, and a woman on the street said, Mr. Franklin, what kind of government are you going to give us? He said, a republic, madam. I hope you can keep it. Because he had pointed out in that meeting that the type of government we have in our country is made for a God-fearing, his words, this is a government that is made for a God-fearing people. You see, you really can legislate morality. Most laws legislate moral behavior. Most laws do. They legislate either moral behavior or safe behavior. Ever notice that? Why in the world would we have a law against murdering people if it were not a moral issue? I mean, you think about it, there's just some people, I've heard it said, that there's some people that just ask to be killed. I saw a statement, somebody made the statement, there are people that are alive today just because I don't look good in an orange jumpsuit. You think about that, and why would it be illegal? Because it's immoral. I told my children, I'm not all about my children being tattletales, because usually when they're telling on one another, this is what annoyed me and I want you to know about it. I tell them I don't want to hear that. I want to hear it. If it's immoral, illegal, or dangerous, you need to tell us. You need to let somebody know. If it's immoral, if it's illegal, or it's dangerous, you're not tattling. You're intervening. There's a difference. Now, you consider the context of which Paul was speaking here. They were under Roman rule, imperial Roman rule. That was a tyrannical government. Paul was getting thrown in jail all the time. Why? Because of Paul's religio-political system. Israel was a conquered nation. They had been conquered by Rome. They were a commonwealth, if you will, of Rome. They paid taxes to Rome. They were protected by Rome. But there was within that system the religious system of the Jews, and the system of the religious system of the Jews worked together with the Romans to just kind of pacify one another and get along so that there wouldn't be some rebellion, and Caesar wouldn't have to send an army 1,000 miles across the country in order to put down a rebellion. He ended up having to do that anyway. But there was this religio-political system that was always landing Paul in jail. When Paul wrote this in Rome, a major portion of this, if you read in the book of Acts, he was under house arrest. Not because he broke the laws of the government of Rome. He was a Roman citizen and he used it to his advantage when it played well. But not because of that, but because of the religio-political system of the Jews. And they could throw you in jail, and that's why you keep the church. That's why you keep the state out of the church and the church out of the state. That doesn't mean that you keep Christians out of politics. I met with a politician this week. I had dinner with a politician this week. He is one of the state senators for the state of Iowa. And not United States senator, but in the state house, state senator. And he's a devout Christian. And we had a good time of fellowship together. Doesn't mean we can't be involved, and it doesn't mean that churches don't have any say-so in our system. But I can tell you something, in some systems, they don't. In a lot of countries, they don't have that. When I'm looking at the, number one, I need to consider the context here. I want you to consider the motive of the law. Romans 13:3 says, "For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same." No Christian should use his Christianity to break the law. I'll say more about that here in a minute. So you consider the context in which Paul wrote this. You say, well, Paul almost sounds like a hypocrite. I mean, he was breaking the law all the time. No, he was speaking out against the religious system, and the religious system was using the legal system to imprison him. It's a different system. So, do we obey God or man, and when? When do we obey God, and when do we obey man? And what if there's a conflict? Acts chapter 5 gives us an example. Acts chapter 5, Peter and John were arrested, and they were brought before the council for preaching the gospel. And the Bible says in Acts chapter 5, verse 26, "Then went the captain with the officers and brought them," Peter and John, "without violence, for they feared the people, lest they should have been stoned." That's how much influence the Christian church had. I know a man who pastored a church of 5,000 in a town of 25,000. You pastor a church of 5,000 in a town of a million people, that's one thing. When your congregation is 20% of the population of the city, you can have some influence. And he did. Fortunately, he did not use it for personal gain. It would have destroyed his testimony. But these people were afraid to do violence to Peter and to John. Now, verse 27 says, "And when they had brought them, they set them before the council of the high priest," notice it's the religious system, "and asked them, saying, Did not we straitly command you that you should not teach in this name? Behold, ye have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine." You're welcome. "And intend to bring this man's blood upon us." Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, "We ought to obey God rather than men." The conflict for us comes not over the laws of men, but over the laws of God. Now, my Bible says, "Forsake not the assembling of yourselves together." That's why I got us back in this building as fast as I could. Say, but you had live streaming for what? Yeah, but we kept having service. And then we had service in the parking lot with our little FM transmitter over here. We don't have to use it anymore. What I'm going to do with that transmitter now is I'm going to put a radio in the nursery so that you can listen to the services in the nursery. See, I just don't want y'all putting it on your country and western station while you're in there listening. You have to listen to the church service now. You can't be, gotta be careful about these nursery workers, But I tell you this much, I was on the phone every week to the city. I talked to the mayor. I talked to the police chief. I talked to the head of the health department. I talked to the state attorney general's office. I was pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing to get us back in this building. I was not going to let my church die because some bureaucrat decided you tell me we got to wash our hands, we'll wash our hands. You tell us we got to wear masks, we'll wear masks. You tell us we got to distance socially, we'll distance socially. But don't tell me I can't have church. We'll figure out a way to have church, but you don't tell me I can't have church. I'll figure out a way. I will make adjustments. God didn't tell whoever built this building, God did not tell them to put 3 exits in a room this small. Double doors here, double doors there, double doors there. I knew a pastor up in Indiana, outside of Chicago, actually, it's a suburb of Chicago. And they're designing their new church building. And he said, he calls the fire chief, the fire marshal. He says, I want to meet with you and show you our plans for a new building. And he's saying, well, according to our laws, he had the fire chief and the fire marshal there. He said, well, according to city ordinance, if you've got this many, you got 7,000 seats in here, you're going to have X number of exits. And he said, how long will it take us to get out of that many exits? Asked the fire marshal, they said, how long are you estimating that it'll take? And he said, well, I figured so many minutes. He said, look, I don't want you to tell me how to build this building so that I can meet code. I want you to tell me how to build this so I can get my people out safely. You see the difference? He wasn't interested in just meeting code. I know pastors. I know of a pastor in Kansas, and this aggravates the daylights out of me. He built outside of it on the edge of town so he didn't have to deal with codes. And he built a horrible building. It was way substandard. So substandard that he had a little apartment in the basement where he would keep guests. And he had an evangelist in. And one night there was a furnace malfunction. And that evangelist and his family had to be rushed to the hospital because of carbon monoxide poisoning. And the state stepped in, and the state health department stepped in and examined the building and said, there is nothing about this building that is up to code. He said, well, I didn't mess with the codes. That's why I built outside the city limits. So I didn't have to mess with those codes. Is that biblical? When my Bible says, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, can I tell you something? He destroyed the testimony. And he almost killed 4 people doing it. He almost killed 4 people. He destroyed the testimony of that church. And then he gets up in a preacher's meeting and wants to talk about being persecuted. I thought, I'll never listen to you preach again. Do we obey God or man? Man has the right to put us in jail. In some countries, there are missionaries I know that live under the threat of jail for preaching the gospel. Not because their building is substandard, not because they're breaking laws as far as that's concerned, but because it's just illegal to preach the gospel. And you know why it's illegal to preach the gospel? Because there are religious groups that control the government in those countries. So what do we do? City ordinances, I'm going to obey every city ordinance I can obey. Lockdowns, I'm going to challenge that one because I don't think they're constitutional. But let me explain something. The Bible does not, and I'm talking about businesses, not just churches. 20% of small businesses in America will go out of business this year, will be permanently closed this year because of a bunch of bureaucratic idiot socialists that want to tell us how to run our lives and don't even know how to run their own. Let me explain something here, though. The Bible does not guarantee your rights, nor does it protect your freedom of religion. That is protected by the Constitution of the United States. The First Amendment says this. The First Amendment to the Constitution says this, and I quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. They can't make a church. The Church of England. In our country, that's unconstitutional. And by the way, it was the Church of England was the reason we put that in there. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. George W. Bush said, we don't believe in freedom from religion. He said, we believe in freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. And so what did the liberals go do? They went out and started a group called the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And the news media acts like they have some kind of an authority. No, they don't. They're just a lobbyist. It goes on to say the abridging of freedom of speech, or the press, or the right for people to peaceably assemble, or to petition the government for a redress of grievances. If the government is out of line, I can go to court and I can fight the government all the way to the Supreme Court. And you're going to see a lot more this next 2 years. You're going to see a lot more with the Supreme Court. And by the way, they don't want to take on all of Trump's, they don't want to take on Trump's case. And I'll tell you, it's one simple reason. The Supreme Court does not want to be seen as choosing the President of the United States. They do not want to choose the President of the United States because that will set a precedent that they do not want to set. And I get it. I actually get it. That's why we have a redress of grievances. I saw a little cartoon. They had George Washington talking to Thomas Jefferson, and he's reading this right here. He said, Washington is saying to Jefferson, you're giving them freedom of religion and press and free speech and the right to assemble. We better give them guns too. And by the way, that's exactly why we had the Second Amendment. Let me give you the question. Let me give you the test. Okay, so do we obey God or do we obey man? And when is there a conflict? Well, ask these questions. Number one, is it for my personal good or for the public good? Is the law for my personal good or the public good? In the 1970s and 80s, there were major court battles that went on over Christian schools. Because Christian schools, you see, Christian schools take no money from no tax dollars. They take no money from the government. Therefore, their position is we should not be regulated by the government. And Christian schools were booming because public schools were tanking in the 70s and 80s. Standardized testing scores were plummeting in public schools, and humanism, secular humanism, and the debauchery, our Christian people wanted to get their kids out of it, so they put them in Christian schools, and they started losing tax dollars. The schools get paid from the federal government and the state government based on how many kids per head. They get paid per head per day. And if you start taking kids out of the public school, they're going to lose a bunch of money, and they did. They lost a bunch of money. So what did they do about it? Well, you would think naturally they would want to upgrade their schools and compete. No, they don't want competition. Socialists never want competition. They never want to prove that they're better. They just want to prove they're the only one. So that's how that works. And there were, in the 70s and 80s, you understand, there were pastors going to jail because they would not take a license for their Christian school. Anybody here ever read Pilgrim's Progress? You should read it. If you've never read Pilgrim's Progress, it is the greatest book ever written by a man in history. I will tell you that is my opinion. But Pilgrim's Progress was written by John Bunyan. It is not an easy read. Give yourself time. But it is bloated with scriptural reference. He wrote that from a prison cell because he wouldn't take a license to preach. From the state, I mean. I was licensed and ordained to preach, and somebody pointed to my license on the wall and said, John Bunyan went to prison for having one of those, not having one of those. I said, no, he didn't. Because I was ordained by the church, not the state. See? That's like being a 501c3. Let me tell you a dirty little secret about being tax exempt under the IRS laws. We are considered a 501c3 under the laws of the Internal Revenue Service Code 501-3-C, written in 1978. And we are protected from taxation under that law. But here's the difference. If I want to go out and start if I want to go out and start a charity that is not for profit, I go out and I start to Save the Wombat Foundation. I have to apply to become a 501c3. Churches don't have to do that. Churches are recognized as a 501c3 because the sign says church out there until otherwise proven. And there have been those that have tried to start a tax shelter and were money laundering in the name of a church. They got caught. They got caught by a clause called private annulment. See, the church can pay me anything they want to pay me as long as I pay taxes on it. By the way, I pay taxes on my income. Pastors get an income from their church. They're supposed to pay taxes on that income. The church doesn't get taxed. I'm not the church. I pay taxes. And I'm okay with paying taxes. I'm just not okay with the way the government spends it sometimes. Let me give you 3 questions. Number one, is it for my personal good or for public good? City doesn't have a right to tell me to stop at Tanglefoot and 18th Street down here. What right do they have? They have a God-given right to tell me to stop down there at that red light. They're trying to keep me from killing somebody or getting killed. They have a right to tell me that. The second question is, does it violate my constitutional rights? You better know your Constitution, people. I have a copy of the Constitution on my nightstand. I will read the Constitution next year through, and I recommend you do the same. And the Declaration of Independence. You ought to read that once a year. Just read through the whole thing once a year. Does it violate my constitutional rights? You may need an attorney to tell you whether it doesn't. It may mean a court battle, but it's worth the court battle. And that's covered, that's protected. Our right to do that, our right to sue the state because they're violating our rights is covered under the First Amendment of the Constitution. That's government for a redress of grievance. Petition of the government for a redress of grievance. We have the right to do that. Does it violate scriptural mandate? If they want to tell me that I have to put up X number of fire extinguishers in this building, I'm going to put up X number of fire extinguishers. They tell me I have to have lighted exit signs and emergency lighting, I'll put up emergency lighting. They tell me that I have to have X number of, according to the number of spaces out here in my parking lot, I have to have so many handicap spaces. Technically, they're on shaky ground there. But It's for public interest. And by the way, we're supposed to have 3 out there. According to the law, we have 4 or 5. I talked to the city ordinance guy, and he said, "Oh, you're more than fine on that." And when they tell me I have to do that, but when they tell me I can't teach, they tell me that I have to teach a certain doctrine. When they tell me that I can't teach that homosexuality and sodomy is a sin, then we got a problem. When they tell, by the way, our Constitution says that we stand against same-sex marriage. That's in our church constitution, that we're against it on moral grounds. And the Supreme Court has ruled on that, and they made the ruling so narrow, and they said specifically in their statement about their ruling that a religious organization does not have to extend membership to someone whose lifestyle is against their moral tenets. I don't have to perform gay marriages. Do you know there are people that think I ought to be put in jail because I will not perform gay marriages? Here's the thing: God didn't call me to marry people. They're not going to tell me who I'm going to marry, who I won't. I'm at the point now where I'll only do marriages within the church family or my own family. I don't do marriage. Now, here's the thing. If I was a professional marrying guy, if I started a business and I put it in the newspaper, said, open for business, licensed minister, will perform marriages. You do that, you're opening yourself wide open for a lawsuit. Because then you are discriminating. But I'm under the auspices and the authority of the church. So I'm not going to perform those marriages. Don't have to. Can I tell you, I've done nearly 200 funerals and 35 weddings, and I like those odds. I like that ratio. I'd rather do a funeral than a wedding. You can minister to people better at a funeral than you can at a wedding. And besides that, not everybody about half the people that I've ever married aren't married anymore, but every single person that I've ever buried is still dead. And those are pretty good. That's a pretty good record, don't you think? And we have a testimony to keep. Anybody here ever heard the name Kent Hovind? Kent Hovind was he was a founder of an organization called Creation Science Evangelism out of Pensacola, Florida. And he had a theme park called the Dinosaur Adventure Land. He was found guilty of 58 counts, including failure to pay $845,000 in employee-related taxes. You know what he believed? He believed the government didn't have a right to collect taxes. And he went to jail for 10 years. Now, I think he got a reduced sentence out of that. But his wife also went to jail. And they were forced to pay $640,000 in restitution to the Internal Revenue Service. His wife was convicted on 45 counts involving evading bank reporting requirements. See, here's the thing. The government has the right to collect taxes. And what he had in his theme park was a business. It was not under the auspices of a local New Testament church. You want to know where the big court battle is right now for Christian colleges? Christian colleges are being persecuted by the government. No, they're not. They got in bed with the government 20 years ago. Here's the problem. There were a group of Christian colleges, the one I attended included, Arlington Baptist College included, they wanted state accreditation. Because a college, in order to have reputable college and to get government money, to get in order to get student loans, scholastically, one of the finest colleges in the United States is Hillsdale College. You can't go there on a student loan. They won't take accreditation. Somebody says, why in the world would you go to a college that wasn't accredited? Y'all ready for this? Yale, is that a pretty good college? Yeah, they're not accredited. Harvard, not accredited. Who's going to accredit Harvard? I mean, they're better than everybody, at least they think. They're not going to take accreditation from some little government. No. The Christian school, the Christian colleges wanted accreditation. Well, you know what's happening now? They're not letting gays in. Preaching against sodomy, preaching against homosexuality, preaching against people shacking up together without being married. Won't let couples go there if they're shacking up. Won't let couples go to their Christian college if they're gay. You got a problem. Because for 20 years, those colleges have been taking government money. And I learned this a long time ago. During the primaries, I was invited, me and about a dozen other pastors were invited to sit down with a candidate for the United States presidency, Mr. Ben Carson, Dr. Ben Carson. And I sat in a room with him and 12 other pastors. And we discussed this very issue. He did not understand why Christian schools, and Pastor James Patrick from over in Moline was there, and he runs one of the biggest Christian schools in this area. And he said, no, we are not taking government money. And Dr. Carson didn't understand why. Why wouldn't you? And I said, sir, I said, Dr. Carson, I said, you understand, we fought a vicious battle in the 80s, and there were pastors in this state that went to jail because they would not take a state license. Because, and their argument was, they didn't take government money. And what we have learned through that battle is what the government subsidizes, the government regulates. He said, well, under my administration, Pastor Cannon, under my administration, they would not. I said, sir, I believe you. I said, Dr. Carson, I believe that you would not put that on churches, but somebody would be president after you. And I've seen the pendulum swing too many times. I'm old enough to have seen the pendulum swing too many times. The founder of Creation Science Museum went because he wouldn't pay taxes. You know what it was? It was a simple matter. Tax evasion. He had a business. My opinion is his business should have been paying taxes. Now, the government can't tell him what to say. The government wasn't telling him you can't teach evolution. Government was saying you got to pay taxes. There are churches who have a problem with the fact they've got church vans. They run buses, bus ministries. And they all have license plates. Most churches are forced to pay the government road taxes and get license plates on their vehicles. But they use the roads. Our church, we don't use the roads. I pay for that because I use the roads. You see, we need to consider our testimony. We ought to stand right. Nobody's going to tell me what to preach. There's a line right here. You don't cross that. You don't cross this line. You don't tell me what happens up here. Because what happens up here is between me and God. And you're putting money in that offering plate in my moral position, in my own mentality, by my own ethical standard. You should have a right to say so, and you should at least somebody ought to at least be made accountable for how that money is spent. You ought to at least have a vote in the business meetings. And that's the way our Constitution is set up. But the government doesn't pay this church anything. And they're not going to tell this church anything. You want to tell me how many parking slots I got to have? You want to tell me that I can't have any more people in here because it's a fire hazard? I can't put 300 people in this room because it's a fire hazard? You want to make those kind of rules? I'll deal with that. But don't tell me what to preach. And don't tell me when to have a meeting. Don't tell me where to meet. And you sure don't tell me how to spend my money, because you didn't give it to me. I'm talking to the government now. So yes, our stand is, we, as much as it lies within you, be at peace with all men. Obey the laws of the land. It is a bad testimony to speed. I know preachers that justify it. Well, I'm doing the Lord's work. That's why I was going 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. Okay, next time you run over a kid, maybe you can explain that to their parents that you were doing the Lord's work. Me personally, I'd like to keep a better testimony than that. That's all, Stan. I got to quit. Took longer than I meant to, but the conclusion is this: obey them that have the rule over you in the law. Let them be in charge in their jurisdiction. That's the key word. They don't have jurisdiction right here. They have jurisdiction as far as safety regulations, that kind of thing, in this building for public safety. And that's fine. I'm all about that. But the government has no position within organized religion. Keep the state out of the church, and keep the church out of the state. Not Christians, not God's people. The church as an organization, the corporate body that is the church, needs to stay out of the state. Now we can use our, it's like one evangelist was at one of these protest meetings where these preachers were going to jail for not having a license, and they stuck a camera and a microphone in his face. Said, we are doing a live broadcast here, sir. And who are you? He said, I'm an evangelist, and I'm here to support these. And he said, what right do you, as an evangelist, Reverend Lee? He said, Reverend Lee, as an evangelist, what gives you the right to be involved in politics? Now, he's sitting there in a wheelchair with no legs. As he was giving this testimony, he said, well, I just kind of figured that since I went halfway around the world, got my legs blown off in Vietnam fighting for my country, and I paid taxes, I had a right to be involved in government. He said, well, let me ask you, sir. Let me ask you a question, sir. He said to the guy with the microphone and the camera in his face. He said, let me ask you this, sir. What right do you think that Reverend Jesse Jackson has to be involved in politics? What right did you think that the Reverend Martin Luther King had to be involved in? He said, at that moment, it stopped being a live broadcast. It's all in who you're in bed with, isn't it? It's all in. I can tell you 75% of what I need to know about you by knowing who you sleep with, who you voted for, and who you write your checks to. I can tell you 85% of what I need to know if I know those three things. Heads bowed and eyes closed, and said, gotta quit. I would admonish you in this invitation time to pray for your country. We need it. Our country desperately needs prayer. Pray for your president. And if Joe Biden if he does end up being inaugurated on January 20th, I would strongly admonish you, pray for your president. I'm already praying for Joe Biden. I'm already praying for Kamala Harris. I'm already praying for them. I don't think that the conservative factions, I don't think the court, I don't think the press is going to let it happen. I don't think they're going to let Trump have his day in court. Not until they get somebody else in office. He will have it down the road, but not until he has his day in office. Or not till he won't have it until he's out of office. And I don't know what they're going to be. They might be horrible presidents, but I pray for President Trump regularly. I also pray for President Obama regularly. And I also pray for, and I will also pray for Joe Biden. Because we're commanded to. We have enjoyed such freedom in America. And if God's people do what God's people are supposed to do, we'll continue to do so. We need to pray for our country. We need spiritual revival. Political revival is not going to do it. We need a spiritual revival. Father, that's our message tonight. I pray you bless this invitation. Thank you for our time together. Thank you for these dear people. Father, I pray that you'd use this invitation time for your honor and glory. I pray these things in thy name. Amen. As the music plays, the altars are open.